Yeah. There's a law that Tim Walz signed that says the court can take jurisdiction, which in this instance means custody, over minor children who are not getting the gender-affirming care, which is a lie. There's only two sexes. Gender's bullshit. There's men and there's women. One cannot become the other. And he signed a law saying that they can take jurisdiction over minor children who are not being affirmed by their children and get all of those procedures done outside of any connection. Your parents will have nothing to do with it. They won't have access to you.
That's so dark.
What happens when Tim Walz leads like a blender stuck on oops? You get a messy political mix. No clear plan, no strong stance, just a lot of confusion. Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson didn't just criticize him, they went all in, full of sarcasm and disbelief. From missing police departments to strange tax ideas, Walz is facing some of the harshest criticism in years. This isn't just people pointing out mistakes, it's a full-on crash, and Tim showed up unprepared. Get ready, things are about to get rough.
Taylor Swift. That's how I would like to begin. This woman has got she's a billionaire. I saw her amazing mansion in Rhode Island. I went to some hotel there, and there it is up on a cliff. You've never seen a more beautiful home. It's one of, 20? She's got so many gifts thanks to all of you. Thanks to your daughters, who you probably had to drag to her concerts, and you want to make your daughter happy, and so you didn't, and it's true whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And how does she...
Tim Walz is like a bargain bin version of Napoleon. If Napoleon traded war plans for scented candles and government jargon. If being clueless were an Olympic sport, Walz would win the gold. Then shut down the stadium for public safety. He's not really leading the state. It feels more like he's giving a talk called How to Confuse Everyone and Get Nothing Done.
What Tim Walz has done on the LGBTQ front, let me tell you what's going to happen, okay? Here's what's going to happen. A little girl sitting in Wisconsin who's maybe on the spectrum, maybe has acne, maybe is a little heavy set, maybe feels upset because the parents are getting divorced, something like that, is going to find herself down a rabbit hole on Reddit. And her parents aren't going to know because they're getting a divorce and they're not focused on her right now. And she's going to spend hour after hour on that thing, and Reddit's going to tell her she's actually a boy. And she's going to get sucked into this gender cult. And she's going to say, Mom and Dad, I want puberty blockers into cross-sex hormones, which will sterilize her and deprive her of all sexual pleasure for the rest of her life.
Let's start with how Tim Walz handles real emergencies like their small calendar mix-ups. During the riots, when parts of Minnesota were actually on fire, he reacted as calmly and slowly as a yoga teacher on strong meds. His big plan: check his horoscope, post a vague tweet, and give a press conference that felt more like a sleepy TED Talk than real leadership.
Needed a weak man, because it is the party of weak men and unhappy women. One of which leads to the other, by the way. Where you find weak men, you will inevitably find unhappy women. Sorry. And they make them on purpose. They weaken the men to drive the women insane, to have the most consistent voting bloc ever in the history of politics. Unhappy women made unhappy by weak men.
Target stores were going up in flames, and whole neighborhoods looked like something out of a disaster movie. And Tim Walz. He seemed more focused on practicing his worried look in the mirror. Instead of taking real action, he gave vague comments about big issues and delivered a weak press conference. Like he was lazily waving away a mosquito at a fancy brunch he wasn't even supposed to be at.
On the disastrous performance he delivered, in particular when it comes to his self-described knuckle-headed behavior. This one was that he was in China when the Tiananmen Square disaster unfolded, when hundreds of people were killed.
I have my dates wrong. I was in Hong Kong and China in 1989. That move from Hong Kong into China, it was profound for me. That was the summer of democracy. I said it's where I understood how sacred democracy was. It's what encouraged me, about 15 back and forth with my students, taking them to China. I speak like everybody.
But don't worry, Tim Walz eventually did something. After the chaos ended and the smoke cleared, he launched a statewide listening tour. That's right, listening. Because nothing says strong leadership like asking people what they would have done while he was busy checking Twitter. And when it came to dealing with law enforcement, he backed down quickly, afraid to upset anyone, activists, police, or even squirrels. He didn't just stop supporting the police, he ran them over, blamed the GPS, then gave a press conference about road safety. Meanwhile, crime in Minneapolis got much worse. Carjackings became so common they were almost like a new ride service. At one point, getting mugged on the way to yoga was just part of life, like kombucha or pricey toast, and Tim. He made a task force, which basically means, I'm not solving this, but I want it to look like I'm trying.
Tim Walz, the court will take custody of her, use the Medicaid funds in Minnesota to provide her all of those things, chop off her breasts, sterilize her with the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones. And when this girl inevitably comes to the conclusion that she didn't want any of this, that it only added to her problems, which were the divorce and the acne and the puberty and not any trans issue, who is she going to go to then? This is all because of Tim Walz. That's what Minnesota is doing right now to little girls and boys, taking custody away from the parents so that they can have these procedures without any loving parent.
Then came Tim Walz's big idea to improve public safety, a plan so unclear and full of trendy words. It sounded like it was written by a chatbot after too much cheap wine. He talked about things like rethinking accountability and holistic engagement, which is just a fancy way of saying, I don't really know what I'm doing, but these words sound smart. And speaking of confusion, let's talk about education, or what Walz has turned into his own playground of bad ideas. While he's been in charge, Minnesota's public schools have fallen apart. Test scores dropped, classrooms became chaotic, and his solution, focus more on feelings. Emotional learning took center stage. Kids did peer empathy sessions, breathing exercises, and mindfulness circles, but actual subjects like math and reading, not a priority. As long as a second grader can draw their emotions in crayon and cry with confidence, it was seen as success.
Up my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it.
First of all, kudos to CBS for allowing Governor Walz to quote Matthew 25:40 without interrupting him and saying, I'm sorry, that's an attempt at bringing in foreign disinformation campaigns. We can't accept that.
May those words burn on your tongue.
Right.
Meanwhile, real teachers were buried in so much paperwork and red tape, it felt impossible just to set up a parent-teacher meeting. Lessons stopped focusing on reading, writing, or math. Instead, they turned into emotional scavenger hunts that looked like they came from Pinterest and were overseen by feelings experts. Parents weren't just worried about grades. They were confused when math homework came with a trigger warning and a link to a meditation video. And the students, they're graduating, knowing less than ever. Some think a thesis statement is a social media post, and that photosynthesis is a filter on Instagram. But Tim Walz, he was too busy turning schools into something that felt more like craft time at summer camp. He posed for pictures with school mascots like he invented the alphabet, tweeting about reimagining learning. In Walz speak, that meant beanbag chairs in the hallway, fairy lights on the ceiling, iPads for everyone, and no idea how to spell government.
Laughed right along. Here they are laughing over their white guy tacos, suggesting whites only eat tacos with meat and cheese, because I guess he's now our official white person spokesman.
Like I have white guy tacos and
What does that mean? Like mayonnaise and tuna? What are you doing?
pretty much ground beef and cheese.
That's okay. Do you put any flavor in it?
No.
Oh.
Here's the deal. No, they said to be careful and let her know this, that black pepper is the top of the spice level in Minnesota, you know.
I'm the first vice president, I believe, who has ever grown chili peppers.
Well, trying to expand
We'll figure that-
my food knowledge.
You know what? We've got some cantaloupes. You'll be fine.
But wait, the chaos wasn't over. Then came COVID, which Tim Walz probably saw as his big moment to shine, and totally blew it. He handled the pandemic like it was a game show, collecting every lockdown rule he could find. One week it was bars, then gyms, then schools, restaurants, hair salons, skating rinks, church services, even grandma's knitting group wasn't safe. It felt like he was spinning a giant shutdown wheel. Every week while sipping kombucha and throwing around fancy words. He rolled out executive orders like a dad. With a new label maker, everything had to be closed, taped off, or locked down. Parks were shut like they held national secrets, and churches were closed unless your God was coffee and your church was Costco. Somehow, liquor stores and big retail chains were called essential, but saying goodbye to a dying loved one wasn't. You couldn't hug your mom, but you could wrestle someone for toilet paper in aisle 5.
Nothing wrong with that guy. He's a weirdo. He's a weirdo, and you can tell watching him. And I'm sorry, I just lived long enough that I know that your gut level perceptions are rooted in truth. They're not always precisely true. I've gotten many things wrong, like the details are unknown to me. But I look at that guy and I'm like, you're a weirdo. And everyone's like, no, he's so normal. No, not normal.
And Tim, always the PR expert, kept saying it was all about the science, but not real science. More like science he overheard on a Zoom call between a CDC intern and someone who once made coffee for Dr. Fauci. By the end, the rules were so confusing they felt like a weird dream mixed into a kale smoothie. You could join a massive protest, but couldn't go to a small funeral unless you cried through your N95 mask. Churches were treated like virus hotspots, but crowded raves downtown. Somehow fine, as long as you whispered. His vaccine rollout was a mess, like playing pin the jab on the donkey. The elderly, not urgent. First responders, maybe later, but if you were a 22-year-old yoga influencer with a gluten allergy and a ring light, congrats. You were first in line. Meanwhile, seniors were frantically refreshing their browsers, hoping to book a vaccine before their bridge club ran out of members.
Walz is not. So Vance is looking at Walz saying, what about my assertion is incorrect? And Walz's response was, it was fact-checked at the ABC debate.
The law is written to try and make a point. That's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate.
From 2015 to 2023, which was the date Tim Walz repealed the law requiring life-saving care, 24 babies were born alive in Minnesota after an attempted abortion.
And when people started asking why their sick uncle was still waiting for a vaccine, while a 23-year-old with a smoothie blog already got it, Tim Walz just kept repeating the same word, equity, over and over, like a stuck Alexa. He said, it's so often, people in Montana joked it might show up as a prize in their cereal boxes. His whole team acted like equity was fuel, and they were driving it straight into a clown car of failed ideas. As long as Tim could slap the word on a hashtag, print it on a tote bag, and tweet a blurry photo of himself staring at a pie chart, he thought he was doing great. Equity became his all-purpose excuse, a magic word to avoid fixing anything real. Because, apparently, nothing says we care like broken systems painted in rainbow colors and posted online, with a vague caption that sounds like it came from a team of motivational fridge magnets.
Vote for Tim Walz, who I just want to say once again, I'm totally convinced is creepy. I think I'll be vindicated. I hope I'm wrong, but I think he is. But whatever, he's clearly weak. And Doug Emhoff, his daughter, comes out on stage. Again, I'm trying not to be mean, but I look at Doug Emhoff's daughter, miserable, covered in tattoos, and I'm like, anyone who has a child like that should not have political power, because you've messed up enough. Do you know what I mean? I do think that your personal life really matters. If you don't have a spouse who loves and respects you, if you don't have children who love and respect you, I feel sorry for you, but you definitely can't have control over my life, because you have not done a good job.
And don't even get us started on the economy. Under Tim Walz, Minnesota's finances were as shaky as a Jenga tower during an earthquake. Small businesses were crushed by his lockdown rules, while big corporations got special treatment, like CEOs were shopping for discounts on Cyber Monday. When everyday people worried about rising prices, Walz basically responded with, "Have you tried not being poor?" Then funded a workshop teaching people how to grow kale in their bathtubs. As for the housing crisis, it got about as much attention as a spam email. Rent went up, homelessness got worse, and Walz's big fix was to throw money at the problem with no real plan, just hoping something would stick. His housing policies were mostly shiny flyers, vague promises, and photo ops of him wearing a hard hat and fake smile. The media got nice headlines. Regular people got kicked out of their homes.
And by the way, what is he doing in a high school setting with children, talking to them about their sex lives? That's just prima facie wrong. It's totally wrong. And a healthy society would not tolerate that. You are not allowed to have teachers talking to kids about their sex lives. And I don't care if you're saying, oh, they're bullied. Okay. But you're still, adults are not allowed to get involved in the sex lives of children unless they're the parents of those children, period.
He started the LGBTQ alliance.
I just disagree with the entire thing. The gay straight alliance, are you an anti-gay bigot? Well, of course I'm not an anti-gay bigot. I am just against, across the board, creepy teachers talking to other people's children about those children's sex lives. That is totally wrong.
And then there's the transportation mess. Tim Walz acted like potholes were a charming part of Minnesota's identity, as if crumbling roads were just quirky. Local flavor. Driving here doesn't feel like commuting anymore, it's more like joining a demolition derby. Instead of fixing roads, Walz spent millions on bike lanes hardly anyone uses, and launched endless transportation equity studies, which is just government speak for spending a lot to say very little. And don't forget the light rail project, Minnesota's super expensive, barely useful answer to a question no one was asking. It's over budget, way behind schedule, and about as reliable as a politician's promise. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly didn't even have to exaggerate, the failure was obvious. Tucker joked that Walz runs the state like someone who skimmed a socialist pamphlet and just made up the rest. Megyn ripped into him like he was the last scrap of trust left in government. But honestly, Walz didn't need their help falling apart. He arrived already in pieces.
Yes, it was a throwaway dumb joke about tacos, but there's a reason they felt comfortable. They would never do that in a way that would denigrate black people or Hispanic people. People online actually fact-checked. He was lying. He submitted the winning turkey taco tot hot dish and won first place at Senator Al Franken's annual hot dish off back in 2016. The point is simply, what does he do? He shits on fellow white guys because it's so in vogue. It's so like...
Remember how Tim Walz seemed to treat avoiding blame like it was his actual job? The buck didn't stop with him, it packed its bags and left the state. If a policy failed, it was the legislature's fault. If crime rose, it was society's fault, and if people were upset, he blamed misinformation. At some point, it felt like he might blame the stars or a computer glitch from the Matrix. And when it came to making real decisions, good luck. Nothing happened without a 12-person task force, 2 subcommittees, and an equity council made up of people who thought crosswalk signals were oppressive. The only thing Tim managed smoothly was repeating trendy buzzwords into a microphone. And then, just when you thought things couldn't get more awkward, he hinted at running for re-election, as if Minnesota hadn't just lived through a 4-year improv act, led by a guy who thought leadership meant hiding behind a podium and nervously smiling during every crisis. Honestly, his campaign slogan could have been, "Lower your expectations," or "Hey, at least it wasn't all on fire."
Well, there's another thing. There's another thing about Tim Walz that hasn't gotten as much airtime, and it's true. He actually did remove. They were coming up with the Minnesota human rights law and revising it, renewing it. You know, this class is protected. You can't discriminate against these people, and you can't discriminate against gays and lesbians. And the law had said, to be clear, pedophiles get no protection under this law. Pedophiles do not fall under the definition of a protected class. And they removed that language. They removed that language under Tim Walz. Yeah. That the pedophiles...
But here's the wild part. Tim Walz still walks around like he cured polio with essential oils and positive thinking. He acts like a hero for surviving a disaster he helped create, like the guy who set the house on fire, then wants a thank you card for calling 911.megyn. Kelly summed it up clearly. This is why Americans don't trust blue states. And Tucker Carlson called it a masterclass in how not to govern, a political blooper reel, starring a man who thinks hashtags and hope are the same as leadership.